Welcome to the first part of the Ogroid Myrmidon Masterclass painting series. A few words about this series before we start. If you have the attention span of a goldfish and want to jump right into the action, you can skip ahead to the timestamp displayed on screen. I'll use Citadel and Vallejo colors as much as possible, which are the colors that we determined people have the most, so that everyone can follow along. It's no big deal if you don't have the exact color that I use now and then, just use a similar color or an equivalent from a different company. If you're unsure, put the color you need to replace in the comments. I'm sure someone will help out. All of this is not necessarily about following an exact recipe, but to learn some new things about painting. I will show you my way of painting. We're all individuals and develop our own styles and preferences. If at any point you want to stray from what I do and do your own things, that's fine. I believe in you. My way of painting does not involve a lot of planning. I develop a paint job as it progresses. Painting is a fluid process. We don't make mistakes, just happy little accidents. Everything we paint and don't like can be fixed with more paint. In the first video, we are going to start by building a base that complements the pose of the miniature. It's completely optional. If you want to build a simpler base, feel free to do so. And come back for the second video. You can join my Discord server and post your progress in the designated public channel, or share your progress on Instagram using the hashtag #TrovarianMasterclass. And yes, that's an O at the end. I'm doing this on my free time, so if you want to give something back and maybe see more of these masterclasses in the future, maybe share the videos with your painting friends, Facebook groups, Reddit, etc. Sorry I have to ask for this, but I simply don't have a large fan base that does this automatically like other YouTubers have. The number one thing that helps a YouTube channel is subscribers. Let others know that there is a place where they can learn something new about miniature painting. Thanks a lot if you do. I can't say enough how grateful I am for those of you supporting me. Of course, you can also join the channel membership or the Patreon, or use one of my affiliate links in the description to buy new brushes or any of the other gear linked that you would have to buy anyway, and give me a bit of revenue in the process. Remember, the goal of this video series and of miniature painting in general is to have fun. If you have any questions, put them in the comments. That's all I had to say. Let's start. Okay, here's an overview of tools and materials that we are going to need for this video. I'm going to go over everything and explain shortly why we need it and what we're going to use it for. You're going to need some pliers. You can use the more blunt ones or sharper ones, and we're going to use these to rip chunks out of our cork plates. If you're using a plate like this where the chunks are bigger and it's more loose, you see this room between the chunks, those rip more easily. Usually, if you were not able to get one of these, then you can also use these cork types. Obviously, one-piece corks that come with wine bottles, for example. Those are a bit harder to rip, so that's why we are going to use some tools for that. Yeah, make sure that you rip larger chunks. And again, that's why I said get one of these plates. One of the IKEA plates works. This is not an IKEA plate. I got that from a do-it-yourself store. And like I said, make sure that the chunks are more loosely connected and they're bigger, because that's going to make for a more realistic appearance of the stone that we want to create. Something that doesn't work all that well is these type of corks that have, leftover chunks pressed together, and they don't look as naturally, or they don't look like stones necessarily. That's why I'm trying to avoid them. Also, yeah, try to avoid plates that are of this grain size. Again, it's a matter of creating something that looks a bit more realistic, a bit more credible. Obviously, we're going to need some kind of hobby knife just to, cut through chunks or cut down chunks that we want to make smaller. Also, we are going to need some super glue to glue on the chunks to the base. Then optional, I'm going to use it. I'm going to do some pinning of feet of the Myrmidon into the base. And for that, you're going to need some appropriate wire too. One thing that I'm going to do, I'm not going to go over all the preparation because I have a video for that already on this channel, but I'm going to get rid of a few details that I didn't like too much on the Myrmidon. Again, that's optional, but that's just me. I kind of want to get rid of detail that I don't like to paint. So I have some sandpaper. This one is a 1000 grit. You can get away with probably 800, and that's a rougher one that is a 400 grit. Just something that will help us smooth out some surfaces. Going back to the base for connecting the stones, sometimes, you know, we have gaps that we want to fill. We will need some Milliput, or you can use green stuff or whatever you have at hand. It's not that important. Milliput obviously works the best for me. It's easier to press some cork into Milliput, and it's going to assume the shape that you use to press on the Milliput. Doesn't work that well with green stuff, but again, use anything that you have. It's not that much of a big deal. Some people like to put PVA glue over the cork. I don't do that. I feel like the cork chunks, once covered in a base coat spray, are sealed enough and ready to be painted on. That's it. Let's jump in. I did not film how I assembled the miniature. There is a video on how I do my gap filling and preparation on this channel. I'm going to link it right here so you can check it out. I did assemble almost everything. I only left out the shield. I like to assemble everything as much as possible and keep the sub-assemblies to a minimum. I feel like the shield, you know, goes on easily and without a lot of seams, so that, you know, you don't really have to fill that. So I left that out, but I assembled everything else. You can reach everything really easy with a brush. I feel like the only thing that I'm a bit worried about is this area down here where the tail goes, but it's okay, I think. The first step is going to be to create a base. So before I start my bases, I always try to analyze the pose of a figure and to see what's possible with the out-of-the-box sculpt. I always like to individualize my pieces with some small effort. It doesn't need to take too long. Just in this case, we will probably clip off this part here. I simply don't like it because the texture of this is really not easily reproducible. So what I will do, I will cut this off and then use some cork below as an elevated part that he can step on. So I thought about having him walk up a slope, be inclined a bit more like this. But I feel like the pose is the most dramatic like this, where he has that slightly hunched forward aggressive stance. Might get lost if we incline the stones below like this. So I thought about doing something else. I will probably use the rule of thirds when we look at it from the front. I'm going to put it slightly to this side of the base and create something like a slope that ties in naturally with how he holds a spear. So we will have a slope here that he is walking up, and then have a bit of negative space here. It's little tricks like that that make your miniatures more interesting, and stand out from other versions. And again, there's just not much investment here. It's a simple trick that we can do. So let's quickly get rid of this part, and then we're going to recreate that step that he does with some cork. I'm just going to clip off these chunks part by part so that I don't ruin anything that I want to keep. Just carefully getting rid of the larger chunks, and then we're going to switch to hobby knife. When you use these clippers on plastic, what happens is that can stretch out the structures that we want to keep, for example the hoofs. So we need to leave some space between that. Probably not telling you anything new here. It's the same thing that happens when you cut something out of the sprue with not enough space left between the actual structure and the sprue. Then you just pull out a tiny bit of material and you have to repair it. So now I'm moving more carefully. It's just carefully cutting that down and going over the edges again, just to get rid of the extra material that accumulates there. You can see it like this. From sandpapering like this. So just doing the exact opposite and getting rid of that extra material here, just so that everything is smoother. And that should be it. That's the figure ready to be mounted on some cork. Okay, time to get some chunks of cork. I'm just going to break off these chunks. So I dig my pliers into the material a bit like that, and then I'm just, without much force, so I'm not pressing down like that, putting my pliers in there, and then I'm just turning them slightly, and you can see that there's chunks falling out. You want to get rid of loose parts like this. So what we're after is, yeah, that's a good chunk, and the underside being flat helps us with attaching the chunks to the actual base. Another thing where this helps is you can do exactly the opposite and put feet of your miniature on this. So for example here, this would fit exactly, yeah, this would fit pretty good for our Myrmidon here, so like that. So those are the two reasons why you want to probably have these flat chunks. I'm going to get rid of smaller pieces like this here in the front, like that, just so that we don't have, you know, obviously we want that flat surface, but we still want, yeah, more chunky edges for the rest, so that it doesn't look too artificial. You won't encounter rocks that are exactly shaped, like down to a millimeter of sharpness. Yeah, so that's a good chunk too. I'm going to keep that, and again, you want to get rid of these excess smaller parts that are too loose and don't look good. This should be really compact chunks to work with. Let's create a few more. Just run your fingers over all the edges, and that gets rid of any material that is just flip-flopping around there. Okay. So if you are using cork like that, I recommend just cutting it and just breaking it, and then you can do the same thing. You just want the leverage of these two. You don't want to press down too hard. Just try ripping it up, and it creates some interesting shapes. You can do something interesting with those two. Do the same thing, get rid of some loose material. We need to cut these down a bit. So for example here, I would definitely, because it's rather round, I would definitely try to get this shaped a bit more straight. That's a good piece of cork. Yeah, so what you're after is these edges that look aggressive and sharp, because the Myrmidon has a very aggressive stance, and we want to support that with a really harsh environment. That's just some way to underline certain elements of the figure that we have. So let's continue that. I'm just going to create more of these. Whenever we have to straighten something out, just do like this to get rid of the round areas, and that way we can put that directly on the base. Right, so we have a good portion of chunks, good variety of chunks, and now it's time to find one of them that will fit to the underside of the hooves. So what I'm doing here is I'm gluing this part directly to the hooves, so we don't have to put down the flatter chunks on the base and then struggle to place the miniature on top. That way we are a bit more flexible, and I can decide exactly where I want the hooves to go, and then we can continue to glue chunks to the base that build the bulk of what we want to do with the base. So let me just quickly do that. Yeah, what I forgot to do is I want to get rid of the veins here, and probably also the veins on the arms. Definitely want to get rid of this one. So I'm going to scrape those away with my hobby knife and then just go over everything with a finer grit sandpaper. The reason why I want to get rid of those is sometimes less is more. With painting, I don't want to have to deal with these details. I don't find them that well sculpted, first of all. And then also, like I said, I don't want to deal with them. They are interrupting the volumes, so I want to focus on the volumes more than anything else. And if I want a bit more detail there, I'm just going to add it with paint. This obviously is no problem when you are painting with washes. You just wash over it, and then the washes are settling in the recesses, and it's going to be defined, and then you just dab on color with a brush to make them stand out more. But again, I want more control here. I want to define these volumes and also this volume here, and add my own details with paint. And yeah, I just don't like how they are sculpted. So let's get quickly rid of those. Just dragging the hobby knife across the surface so that it conforms a bit to how the volumes are shaped. It's just going to get rid of that excess material with too much hassle. Okay, and then we can take the finer grit sandpaper, make it a bit wet so that the dust doesn't come off. Just smooth out this area again. Okay, quickly going to do that also up here off cam. I also want to get rid of this vein, at least the one arm that goes down. So just dragging the knife across the surface to even it out as much as possible. And carefully scraping away here, trying not to get rid of too much of the upper part. Again, I don't really like how they sculpted that. I feel like sometimes they just put detail there for detail's sake. I'm not a fan of that. You know, I'm also a sculptor and I get easily annoyed by things like that. So I think that's a bit more subtle. We can leave that one line there. Yeah, and we can also define that more properly. I think that's going to work. Just going over this with a fine grit sandpaper. Yeah, obviously you don't have to do that. You can paint it as is, but like I said, it's just parts that I don't really like. Okay, let's continue. Just finding another part that is flat on top for him to stand on. That's good. Going to tone that down a bit because this is the lower part and this should be higher, so let's get rid of this part here. It's going to be easier to compose a base around that. So the leg that is in the back is the one that should be level. So that's what we're going to focus on. I'm going to make sure that we have the rule of thirds with the figure standing in this third of the base. And then I just need chunks that I can glue on down here. That's going to stabilize everything a bit. So let me just do that quickly. Just using smaller chunks for this. Yeah, I think that's good. Keeping the original pose like this. And having the figures stand in the right third of the base. Just want to make sure that the face aligns forward. You could of course play around with that, but I feel like, yeah, that's the pose that we're going for. So let me glue all of this to the base, and then we have to work on stabilizing everything and build the rest of the volumes for the base. So just using a large chunk of super glue, then making sure the position is right and also the alignment of the face. I think that's good. That leaves enough space on this side, again, to have some negative space. Something I also don't like is when the weapons of a figure just stand out too much over the edge of the base. I kind of don't like that, so that fixes it too. Okay, it's a bit of a wobbly thing. Actually, it's quite stable. So now, like I said, we are just going to add chunks of cork to stabilize that. We are looking for pieces that are inclined a bit, so that we can create a slope here. Actually, I'm just going to glue that on to help stabilize everything. In the back, we need some stabilization too. And remember, we want the lower part to be flatter so that he has to take that step up. It would look weird if everything here is just higher than this part, and it would take away from the composition again. Take this chunk and glue it right under the first one. Just gradually stabilizing everything before we finish the rest of the volumes of the base. So just getting rid of this part that is still the round, smooth side of the cork. Stability is good. I thought about pinning everything, but it's probably not necessary. The rougher surface of the cork bonds pretty well with the plastic. And again, you can't beat the utility that just gluing a piece of cork to the miniature brings when it comes to positioning and then building the rest of the base around it. Okay, I like how that slopes up, that part here. We have a tiny part in the back that kind of messes with that, so I'm going to reduce that before I continue. That's more in line again. Now I'm going to build all the in-between parts. So what I will have to do is just find suitable chunks. That means I'm going to probably have to make these a lot smaller, so just get rid of that. Yeah, just to get flatter pieces, and then we're going to add that here. Just to continue that notion of the floor being actually stone that comes maybe out of a bit of a desert or dusty area. Yeah, so let's continue doing that. Okay, the idea behind this is to break the slope a bit. At the same time, it's creating a bit of a line that's parallel to the spear. And everything kind of points to the middle of the body where the face is. Yeah, I think that's good. Breaks up the negative space a bit. Just trying to find a good composition for the base, and just play around with parts and see if you like them. And if you already glued them on and you don't like them, then just you can just rip them off again, and it's going to be fine. Again, I really like to develop my bases gradually. At this point I want to switch things around a bit. I got these sprues. One of them you probably know, it's the skull sprue or box from Games Workshop, and this one is the skeleton box. I got this one purely to have material to put on bases. So for example, I can take the ruined shields and put them on the base and cut them in half, or have parts of armor lying around. And they also have some rib cages that work pretty well to just put on a base and have some additional storytelling. I want to actually switch things around a bit. I'm going to move two parts that I already put on. So first of all, I'm going to move this part back there, and I'm probably going to get rid of this one, and I'm going to explain why after I did it. As you can see, that created a bit of an empty space here where I can now put, for example, a rib cage and maybe a sword or a skull. We'll see. I added another chunk that has some protruding element here. It's just a bit smaller than the one we had before, but it still has that, slightly sloping feeling again. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some Milliput here, and then I can press in the rib cage and whatever else we're going to put here. I prepared a bit of Milliput, just mix it in a 50-50 ratio, and I'm just going ahead and I'm pressing on some of it, and I'm just flattening it out with a flat tool that I dip in some water. Just like this, just making sure that it covers the area where I want to put the rib cage and that other detail, and I have it sloping up a bit, like I said, towards this area, just so that I have some material there where I can press something into. Let's see, of course you can always take away if it's too much. Making sure that all of that base is covered. We don't have to be super careful. It can be thicker and thinner on some parts. I'm just making sure, like I said, that I cover all of it so that I can add the same texture if I want to on all that area. Yeah, so I'm just going to keep doing that. Okay, covered most of it. Since we're probably going to use this for texturing, I make sure that these areas here, yeah, are filled too. You can see that. So where there's the beginning of a crack, I just have some material that creeps into this crack so that it looks like it got filled with some soil or whatever. This is soil or dust. So like this. That also makes it so that two different cork shapes don't just sit next to each other and have some awkward distance between them. Yeah, just draws everything together and makes everything a bit more credible and realistic. Right, so we have a few parts back here where I just want to do that too, so just to simulate this soil creeping into the recesses. Right, so I think I want to also just put a tiny bit of a slope here so that it meets this one. That creates, yeah, some extra interest. And now it's time to see what we can put here. Right, so I have 3 pieces here: an arm, a ribcage, and a skull. Like I said, you could take whatever you want, maybe just cut off a shield or a spear or a sword, whatever you want, whatever you have, and just put it there. It creates a bit of a storytelling element. So I'm just taking this part and I'm trying to find the right spot for it. So maybe like this, and as you saw, I pressed that into the Milliput so that on the sides we have a bit of sloping. I'm going to do that, overdo that a bit so that, again, tough to see, but we want the Milliput to slope towards the rib cage, so it's kind of encroaching on the element that is there, so that, yeah, that's what dust and sand would do. It would partially cover whatever is lying there over time. So I have to use a bit of extra material here on this side. And do the same thing. And then maybe also here in the front. Like this, so that it's partially covered. And everything looks a bit more integrated with the base. I'm positioning it a bit towards the inside of this cauldron. Things like this accumulate usually in areas that are next to something that sticks out of the ground. So that's a bit more credible, a bit more realistic. I thought maybe I'm going to also add a hand here, but I don't think so. I think I'll leave the hand out. And then optionally, you can also add a skull. I think I'll put that somewhere here, just so that part of it faces forward like this. So then we have it partially in the quote-unquote frame when we put the miniature down for presentation and pictures like this. Yeah, again, we could of course just put something here too if you want less of that open space. For one of the last steps, I'm going to press in a bit of texture. You want the Milliput to be as fresh as possible for this. Still works, took a bit of time to work on this. So mine is a bit dried in already, but it's still going to work, and I'm just pressing on the blister sponge, and it's going to leave some interesting texture, and it's also going to conform to all these sharp angles, and it's just going to press the Milliput into the recesses. Just putting my finger on and pressing that towards the stone a bit. And that's going to blend everything together. And it's going to leave some interesting texture. Prefer this look a bit to modeling sand because it's a finer texture and you can do more things with it. And here you're a bit more flexible. So for these parts down here, I don't want to mess up and disposition the rib cage and the skull. So I'm cutting off a bit of that sponge, maybe even less. Folding it in like this, and then I'm taking it with the pliers and then I'm just pressing that on here. It's a bit hard to see for the camera, I'm sorry, but just pressing that in so that it also gets textured. Yeah, I think that's good. Let's also do that back here. Okay, I think I like that. Optionally, you can take some soil, some earth from the woods and just look for organic pieces like this and place them randomly. I'm not going to do that for this one. Maybe a tiny detail that's interesting, maybe some, you know, like this, maybe some bark piece that will add some last focus somewhere. Maybe we can put that here like this. Just press it into the Milliput too. Maybe we can find something similar. So this could be scattered wood. And that's just, yeah, that's just left over here like that. So that's just tiny bit of extra detail that we can put on. You know, if you can find small stones, we can also place that where stuff would accumulate, like here. And the Milliput is going to hold that in place. So yeah, just whatever you want to do with some extra detail, it's possible to do that. And back here we can add some other element with this wood piece. Yeah, I think that looks good. Again, you can go as crazy as you want to. Like I said, I don't want to overdo it too much. Yeah, so small wood chunks like that look really, really good. Let's see where I could put this, maybe here, but then again, it's going to obscure the skull a bit too much, so I'm leaving that. But yeah, again, knock yourself out. Put all the detail you want on there. Just don't overdo it and try to tell stories with it. Like maybe this is the remains of a machine or something. Trying to make sense of it and put those where it's credible and not just anywhere. I think it might work here, for example. Yeah, so that's just some extra detail there. Yeah, I think that's where I call it. Not that much effort and still really individual base. You can, of course, like I said, go even crazier, compose more detailed bases, try telling a bit of a story with the bases. I'm pretty sure you can come up with some interesting ideas. I'm going to leave this to dry and then I'm going to base coat it and then I'm going to film the next video. I'm going to start with the skin, I guess. On a model like this, obviously the skin is really important, as well as the face, which should be our focal point, I think. But we'll see. Like I said, I'm going to start and then the paint job is going to develop. So if you liked the video, don't forget to hit the like button, and if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button and activate the bell so that you get notifications. If you want to do me a favor, share these videos with your friends in Facebook groups, on Reddit, wherever you can think of. It helps a lot to get new people to the channel and discover the videos, which is kind of hard on YouTube as it is now, if you're mainly focused on tutorials and teaching people. For now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.